And let's welcome back from the nation's capital, Linda Duxbury, professor at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. Okay, Linda, we've just obviously been talking about the challenges that the Generation Y folks are feeling, experiencing, trying to get good careers in this great recession. I want to narrow our focus now to the public service. And I wonder how the public service is being affected by these tough times. Tell us.
Well, there's a bunch of interesting things. First of all, there's a lot of discussion up here about pensions and the fact that these public servants have these great pensions and vested pensions, and you know, all these other poor people don't have pensions, and so it's unfair. And rather than look at the people who don't have pensions, let's take it away from the public service. That's the big discussion up here anyway. Don't know about Toronto.
Public service, of course, was once, I guess, in the golden age, considered a very noble calling. Among a certain generation. From what you know, do the 20-somethings feel the same way about the public service?
No, and I'm surprised that we would even think they have. First of all, look at what the media and how it portrays them. You know, it's they're lazy, they're not doing a good job. We've got too much public service. Get rid of them. They don't recognize how difficult the job is in many cases in the public service. So, you know, and then a lot of them who've got parents who've worked in the public service, those parents say, geez, you know, I'd rather you didn't take a career there. They've got pretty good pay, pretty good benefits, but you know, they don't get the respect that other people do, and they don't get the respect from the politicians. They don't get, you know, people talk about respect, but, you know, many of the people that I talk to who work within the public service and who I've studied feel that, you know, they're not recognized, they're not rewarded, they're seen as a cost, not a benefit, etc.
Well, let's just make sure we understand what we're talking about here, because a public servant in this country can be everybody from the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, which is a pretty cool, interesting job, I would think, to the person who renews your driver's license, which is, you know, obviously a job someone's got to do, but not necessarily the one, you know, that we'd all rather do. When you do your studies, who are you looking at?
I look at the whole sector. So I do surveys of everybody. So I've got probably data on 10,000 federal public servants. I've got Ontario public servants. I've got from other provinces. I've got municipal. And it's quite interesting because right across the board, I guess what we don't recognize is there's two sets of leaders within the public service. There's the deputy minister and the senior bureaucrats, and then there's also the politicians. And I think that we don't recognize how difficult the conflict between those two groups make it for Joe Blow public servant.
Now, as we talk about the different generations that are trying to get into the public service, can we assume that, you know, the old last in, first out rule goes, and therefore this recession is going to be pretty tough on the younger members of the service?
Well, if you look at the public service right now, there's an overwhelming number of the public services baby boomers. And then they didn't hire very much in the 80s and the 90s in the last recession. So you've got a big pool, then you've got a trough, and then they started hiring again and they hired youth. So, in fact, there's several conflicts within there. First of all, you've got the real conflict between the Gen X again, having to come back to them, who have the boomers on the one hand and the Y on the other hand. And the Y are young, they're keen, they want change. The boomers are fatigued with change. They've heard nothing but change for the last 25 years, but it's never really happened and it's never really benefited them. Gen X, you know, they've been on temporary position after temporary position, haven't been able to get full, like secure positions, haven't been able to get promoted. And in the federal public service, a lot of that is because of this whole issue of bilingualism. So there's some real conflict out there right now between the different groups.
Let me follow up on that bilingualism aspect, because as we just saw from Joyce, who was just on the program, you know, she's got Mandarin. Now, Mandarin's a great skill to have, but it's not one of the two official languages of this country.
No.
So one wonders whether or not, you know, Gen Y, which is, you know, got to be the most multicultural generation in the country's history, you know, whether official bilingualism is in some difficulty in the public service, because this is a group that doesn't have French as a second language. It's got Chinese or something else.
Well, it's interesting when you talk to them about French, it's not so much that they disagree with the concept of French, but they don't think that French should trump skills. So, for example, I'm interviewing a young man and he said, so they're looking for a lifeguard. And I've got all my lifeguard credentials, but I don't have very good French. I couldn't pass my C's. Another person doesn't have any kind of skills as a lifeguard, but is good at French. So they're going to pick the person with the French and teach them lifeguarding, but they're not going to pick me with my lifeguarding and teach me French. And so I don't see anything wrong with requiring bilingualism, but if you require it, you got to train for it. And that's where there's some real challenges within the public service, in that they're requiring it for certain management positions, certain positions across the board, but they're not training for it. And that's where you've got a little bit of a disconnect. Whether it's happening or not, the youth actually see that French is a really important skill set, and they feel that they will have problems within the public service if they don't have it.
Okay, let me read something to you here from the Ottawa Citizen. This is from Max Valaquette, who's a youth marketing expert. It's a speech part of a speech he gave at the Apex 208 conference.
Okay.
The government has many strikes against it, says Max. It's a big, slow, rules-bound hierarchy, and it's not going to attract anyone without the pay. Young people don't connect to government and can't fathom many departments would actually forbid employees from using Facebook, the most important networking technology in their lives at work. They expect to have control over their lives rather than work under the thumb of top-down government. Is this something that the public service has not really adapted to quickly enough?
Oh, I would say not only have they not adapted to it, they don't believe that they have to adapt to it, which is, we provide great pay, good pension, etc. One of the things that I find, there's a couple, public service is very unionized, and unions have some real value, but the problem is that they put policies in place to manage the bottom 10% of the workforce, because it's easier to say no to everybody than to say yes to 90% and no to 10%, because those 10% will grieve. Well, young people, they are incredibly frustrated by that. And, they say, well, everybody knows that person's a lazy bum. If you're not going to deal with that person, fine, fair enough, but don't expect me to do their work. So they've got the challenge of the union. They've got the challenge of a hierarchy. They've got the challenge of the fact that they've been educated to be independent, autonomous, have ideas. They come into a workforce that says, be innovative, be creative, and then whacks them when they're wrong. Because in the public service, if you're wrong and it gets in the press, then in fact ministers will look bad, deputies will look bad, and that shouldn't be done. The real challenge for the public service is it's like managing in a fishbowl. So you've got all those little public servants in there swimming in the bowl, and then you've got the press, you've got the public going, well, I don't like how that one swims, and why should we be training that one, and who brought that greenery? The problem is there seems to be two sets of rules for employees. It's good practice to do something in the private sector, and it's it's just a flagrant misspending of public funds to do it in the public sector. Well, youth go, hello, if it's smart to do it for them, it's smart to do it for me. And if you're not going to do it for me, I'm going to go somewhere where they will do it.
Let me raise another item with you here. And this is, many managers these days, or maybe not many, but some managers these days are imposing these no BlackBerry use after 7 p.m. rules in order to give people a better work-life balance, so we don't see people on their BlackBerries responding to emails at midnight or something like that. And I'll quote you this time. You said a couple years ago.
Agree.
Yeah. If the BlackBerry has increased workload and stress because it has increased the expectations for rapid response times and solutions, and I can tell you there is a big difference between fast answers and correct answers.
Yep.
There's no time to assimilate because we're too busy managing our inboxes than managing our jobs. Question is, has technology made work in the public service worse?
I think it's made work right across the board worse, depending on who's employing you and what their expectations are. But the public service is notorious for BlackBerries. I've heard a story, I don't know if it's true, you should check it, but that Stephen Harper makes all his MPs in his cabinet put the BlackBerry, in little special baskets before they come into cabinet, because everybody's on their BlackBerries all the time. I've spoken to meetings.
I think most caucuses have no BlackBerry rules right now.
Well, because then we can't trust people not to be on it all the time. I've spoken at all kinds of meetings, and people are checking their BlackBerry while you're talking. And the idea is, well, we're important people. No, you're rude. Okay, let's be very clear here. You're rude. And you're signaling to the person at the other end that you don't trust them, you know, or that you have to be on top of it all the time. I think, you know, but the public service is particularly bad in terms of that whole thing. I call it the connected culture, the expectation of 24/7, that, you know, it's a career limiting move in many departments, especially as you go up the ladder, not to be available all the time.
Right. Linda, we got a minute left here. Let's tackle this one last thing, and that is that
Only one?
yeah, time flies when you're having a good time, doesn't it?
Yeah, I got a lot.
If we assume that the boomers in the next 5 years or so are going to vacate the public service,
Yeah. Pretty safe assumption.
pretty safe assumption, then is the next younger generation really being groomed to come in here and with the proper expertise and fill in those jobs?
I think it's not even a question of being groomed. What my data says is a lot of younger people actually will not take those jobs. As you go up the ladder within the public service, especially in middle management positions, director, director general, et cetera, those are meat grinder positions. You're a ping pong ball between the bat above you and the bat below you. Those people work incredibly long hours. They're supposed to be operational experts, coaches, mentors, HR experts, labor management, plus do all their own typing, all their own phone, and clean up the office in their spare time. And an agent of change. What we're seeing is a lot of younger people, and be bilingual, by the way. So a lot of younger people are going, you know, I'm happy in my policy analyst job. I'm trained for it. I love it. I can make a difference. I'm not taking that next job. The real challenge for the public service is to really make the job of manager something that's valued and something that's supported.
Linda Duxbury from the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. Good of you to join us on TVO tonight.
Thank you
Thanks
for
a lot,
inviting
Linda.
me. Take care.
You too.